Hello, and welcome to this week's edition of The Author's Eye with me, your host, Mark Cartwright, and
I'm Sally Ann Melia.
And I'm Richard Fuller.
excellent. Welcome, one and all. And to begin with this week, I thought we might just have a very brief introduction, why we are here and why we're talking about it, what makes us qualified to talk about the literary world. So perhaps if I start with you, Sally, you can give us a brief rundown of what it is that you do.
Okay, well, I'm Sally, and I write basically. Mostly I write science fiction, but I also write non-fiction as well. And yes, so I'm one of those people who've been writing ever since they were a teenager. And in most recent years, I've been self-publishing. So I self-publish science fiction, and I run the Farnham Flash Fiction competition. And I publish flash fiction books and flash fiction help books. And I this year I've written a new book called How to Write Yourself Happy, because actually I really enjoy writing, and it is the one thing that makes me happy, and I want to share that with other people because I think sometimes that gets a bit lost with all the trying to be a bestseller and trying to sort out the Facebook algorithm and trying to figure out how to do Amazon ads and do all the rest of it. Actually, the main thing is that writing makes you happy.
Cool. Right then.
Hi, I'm Richard, and I write crime fiction, crime thrillers. Have been doing so for 20 years or more. Been on umpteen writing courses. So far, not published. Mostly been trying to work with the traditional publishing route. Had requests for full manuscripts and quite a lot of downturns, but we plug on and we'll persevere. And who knows, if things don't get any better, I'll be going down the self-publishing route before long. I'm in the middle of my fourth novel, and when that's finished and edited, then we will take stock.
Excellent. All right, I'd say myself, I am a newbie author. I started writing when I retired 18 months ago. I have self-published my third one's just come out, so I've self-published three novels, and I've got two more in the processes of self-publishing, editors and cover designs, etc., etc. So I'm the newbie, and I'll be relying on these two experts to guide us through the process. So let's begin with then, just very, I suppose, simply, for anybody that's relatively new to the literary world and talking about publishing. I mean, Rich has just highlighted the fact that he's been trying to get published. So let's talk about that. We've already mentioned self-publishing. We've mentioned traditional publishing. There's a third option, which is hybrid publishing. So I wondered whether maybe Richard, you'd like to, or Sally, talk about maybe pros and cons of, say, the traditional publishing approach.
I
I think
think
Richard should talk about the
yeah,
traditional
Yeah, that's what I was
publishing.
yeah,
thinking.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
the traditional route clearly is quite a long-winded process in that you've got to finish your novel, obviously, and polish it and edit it, and then you submit it to your favorite literary agent, and then another 50 or 60 or 100 or whatever, and getting the rejections. And eventually, hopefully, you might get taken on. And I know other authors who have been taken on with literary agents and then there is a whole separate stage to the process that your literary agent now has to pitch your book to the publishers. And that process may not occur. I know authors who've been signed up by a literary agent and not had their book accepted by any of the main publishers. So they've been perhaps 2 years into this process and got absolutely nowhere. Whereas I think so it is a time consuming and slow process. And I think this is where self-publishing or hybrid publishing works in a much faster world and with much more immediate results. Depends which way you want to go, really, and whether you want to be involved in it as much. If clearly, as an author, if you go down the traditional route, then you're pretty much hands off. The covers are decided for you, your book title may be changed for you, your marketing strategy is often proscribed, and you may be able to add to that, and in fact, I think more and more you're expected to do a lot more of your own marketing, even if you do traditional publishing. But if you go down the self-publishing or the hybrid publishing route, I think you have a lot more control over it, a lot more immediacy, and the whole thing is a lot quicker turnaround.
Yeah, I mean,
Sally, would you like to say anything on that?
Yes, I
well,
think, sorry, Mark.
all I was going to say was, I think, as a relative newcomer to the industry, it seems to me that one of the things I saw statistically, it's less than 1% of all books that are submitted to agents. Less than 1% are actually taken by the agent. And I know that obviously Richard's just been highlighting the next step when the agent is trying to then get the book published by one of the big printers or anything else. So it's an incredibly, if you get there, if you can get into the traditional publishing route, it's still got that kudos, hasn't it, of saying, well, hey, I'm a traditionally published author.
I think your percentage is probably even lower than 1%.
Yeah.
When you hear some of the literary agents talking about how many submissions they get every week, every month, and they might take on 3 or 4 new authors a year, then I think you're much lower than 1%. However, I think on the flip side of that, a lot of the submissions to agents are not worthy of publishing. So although they might have if you said 1%, you're the 1 in 100. But I think possibly half of those would never make it to see the light of day, full stop. They're badly written. They've not been thought through. They don't hold water. The plot's got holes in it and many other faults with it. And they've not been edited and checked and what have you. So I think a lot of those will fall through. So I think your percentage in some ways might be a bit higher, but you are fighting then you're fighting amongst the elite of authors wanting to be traditionally published. So I don't think it alters the odds. The chances of getting published are still very low.
Yeah.
But that's semantics, playing with numbers.
Well, I always like to play with numbers. Have you got anything to add on that, Sally?
No, I think I don't think it's necessarily any easier when you're self-publishing. And I think obviously if you've written a novel, you want to be able to share it with your friends. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with uploading your manuscript onto any number of platforms and having someone format it as a novel for you, and then you print out 4 or 5 copies. And I would actually encourage everyone to do that. If they've finished a manuscript, there's a company called Bookbrush that you can actually upload them into Amazon and get a paperback copy without ever publishing it. Or there's a number of companies where you can just upload your manuscript and you get your paperback. And I really think the joy of getting that paperback in your hands and be able to put it on the shelf and show it to people, that's what you've done, is great. Also, I would say that once you put it as a paperback, it's much, much easier to see all the mistakes in it. And that's always an interesting part of the editorial. But if you actually want to go for the self-publishing, then you are then setting yourself up to become a small business. And there is a whole bunch of skills that you need to learn around it. First of all, if you're serious, you have to try and find your own editor. And then you have to listen to what the editor says, and you have to rewrite your novel accordingly. And then once you've had an editor, you have to have a beta reader, a couple of beta readers who might be friends of yours, or you might again find them on the internet and they will give you advice. And finally, you might have proofreaders, you might have a line edit, and then you might have a proof edit, depending on how many rounds you want to go. There are increasing platforms that allow you to do some of this yourself. Some of the Gen AI platforms are making it a lot easier to edit on the fly and to proofread for you. But there's still quite a lot of work when it comes to finishing the novel. And then you have to find a cover. You have to know all about ISBN numbers, whether or not you're going to use an Amazon ISBN number or whether or not you're going to buy your own. You've got to find out where to buy your own ISBN. You then have to be able to format the manuscript from Word into a format for either ebook or paperback. Ebook tends to be fairly straightforward. There's lots of online tools that will take a Word document and make it into an ebook. But if you're wanting that paperback to put in the hands of friends and family, then you have to go to the whole formatting thing, and that takes a little bit more effort. You have to format your book into a certain size, upload it, you have to check it. You have to actually look at every page and check that it's all looking okay. And then finally you push the button and you publish it. Now, then someone says to you, so you give it to your mum, and she says, oh, so you're going to be the next J.K. Rowling. And I have to say that J.K. Rowling has really made things difficult for her, because you have to say to your mother, no, I'm not going to sell 7 million copies and buy an island in the Bahamas for you, mum. That's not going to happen. Because then becomes the whole situation of trying to find your readers. And that is just a whole nother story, which we won't even go into because we're here.
Let's not go into that one, because we could be here for a very long time. I think just to tap into both of those there's the hybrid model. The hybrid publishing model it's how much you want to put into it. As Sally's just been highlighting, when you go down the self-publishing route, you've got an awful lot more of the work. You have to take on a lot more of that work yourself. Now, you can do that free. There are plenty of opportunities to do that free. Wouldn't recommend it, as Sally highlighted already. Getting yourself a paid editor, as I would argue, is an absolute must. But you're looking at anything from £500 upwards. It's just for some people that might be frightening. So there are ways and means that you can do stuff. But if you have got some money, and if you are not prepared or don't feel comfortable or confident in doing stuff, there are companies out there that will take on a lot of those services. And they will, they can organize the publishing for you. They can get you 1,000 print runs if that's what you want. They can do all kinds of things. But the point is, all of that will cost. So you've got your traditional publishing, which is effectively free as the writer, assuming you can get in there and your book is going to be commercially viable for both the agent and the publisher. And then you can then keep it free and go self-publishing, but you've got to do an awful lot of work, and you've got to get so many more skills, and that is for another day. And then the hybrid is the one. Can I just say
there is one really important difference, though? It's philosophically, there's two differences. When you talk about getting traditionally published, and when you read all the press around traditional publishing, there is this ethos of, you have to try hard, you have to spend years in the trenches, you have to be talented, you have to be lucky, then you have to go back and rewrite it all again. And so you end up into this sort of black hole of, I'm not quite good enough. It really does feed into that idea that you're not quite good enough, you're not trying hard enough.
Imposter syndrome is real.
But when you're in a self-publishing thing, it's much more dynamic. It's much more thought of like, you know what, you can change the covers and you can change the world. You can try this, you can do this. You've got so much more power over your own future that I find it's a really positive place to be. And you have a much more sense of achievement.
I think she's trying to sell it to you, Richard.
Yeah, I know. I'm probably moving in that direction in the long run, probably when I finish my current manuscript that I'm working on. But I think there's one other important point to highlight at this moment with the difference between, if you're traditionally published, you would perhaps be lucky if you see 15% of the royalties of the royalties from your book of the selling price. Whereas if you're going down the hybrid or the self-pub route, you will see 50% plus of the revenue from your books. And obviously, every time there's a marketing campaign and people are offering 2 for 1 or buy it for £1 or something, you're only getting your percentage of that lower amount. But it does mean that, although, as Sally highlighted, you have to spend more money on editing it and paying for editors and perhaps paying for cover design and these sort of things, you will get a lot more back in return if the book sells. With traditional publishing, there's very little investment from the author needed. They do it and they take most of the money. with self-publishing, there's much more investment from the author up front. But if it goes well and your book takes off, you will be buying that island in the Bahamas, or maybe not.
A very
But
small one.
yeah, that rock out off the Isle of Wight.
Yeah.
Yes,
Other people call it a buoy, but you can call it an island. Yeah.
yeah.
Right. I think that's probably enough around the types of publishing. So I thought, in common, one of the things that we like to do is be topical and look at some of the literary news. So, and I wanted to talk this week about censorship. And it's not just the big censorship issues that authors are facing in certain American states. It's also having an impact here in the UK. And certainly, I think it's in Canterbury um, recently that libraries are being asked to remove some books, mainly from the children's area. But what I want to do is to ask a question, really, and it's of you two guys, which is, as a writer, should we be aware? Should we be concerned about censorship? One of the things, just maybe it's a question for you, Richard. When traditionally published now, it looks to me, I'm certainly seeing an awful lot more where agents are saying, don't submit your work if it contains sexual abuse or violence
Mm.
or things like that. I mean, that in a way is a form of censorship. Is that something that, in your experience, you've seen?
Sorry, I'm just
Um,
going to close the door. There's a
yeah.
bit of noise behind me.
I think it's something I think we're all rapidly becoming more aware of. And I finished my first novel 10 years ago, and I sort of wrote it in this happy, oblivious phase and put in what I wanted to. And it was a crime thriller, and it had violence in it. And I think now I'm much more conscious of when it comes to a scene with violence in it, what's happening, or indeed what's happening if somebody's captured or taken prisoner or something like that. And I think you're much more aware of it. And I know there's a lot of pressure on having an ethnically diverse character list now rather than just middle class white people in your story. I think you need, if you were particularly in traditional publishing, they will want to see a cast of that reflects perhaps the ethnicity of the country we live in or the country your novel is set in, shall we say.
Yeah.
So I do think there is much more awareness of this. There is a lot of talk now about sensitivity editors. So if your cast then has this mixture of characters from different backgrounds and different religions, you need sensitivity readers to just read it through and make sure you haven't said anything in there that would upset people of those minorities or religions. So it is very much more something he's aware of, and it is a sort of self-policing state we're getting into. And obviously, it's almost, as you say, it's almost certification.
Yeah. No, I think it's interesting. I mean, there is, just to play the devil's advocate, I suppose, if you look at, say, Salman Rushdie and the satanic verses, which, made him effectively made him a household name. So I'm just, if there's a bit of cynicism within me is to say, you know, sometimes if you want to push the envelope, I mean, it's an art form, isn't it? So sometimes people might want to push the envelope. I mean, is there an idea that um, it's better than being forgotten or remaining in obscurity?
I think we're in danger of airbrushing out some history in a way. Enid Blyton books, and when you talked about Noddy and Big
Yeah,
Ears and Gollywog and so on, which she wrote about. And she didn't write about any of them in a nasty way, but they were there in her children's stories. And now a lot of people don't like that. And I don't think they were of their time. And I think we mustn't ignore that. We mustn't apply today's morals on yesterday's
yeah,
writings. And I think that's an important thing to remember. But we maybe if we're writing today, we shouldn't be writing yesterday's morals in our stories, but we should at least appreciate what was written yesterday and not try and airbrush it out of history.
Yeah, well, I think it's a fair point. Great point. Okay, cool. Right.
I think actually there is a case for saying that you can take history and remake it in a more modern way, and television does this really well. If you look at like the Bridgerton series, where they took basically the trope of a Regency, a romantic story, and then they cast it with a multi-ethnic cast,
Mm,
and no one's going to say that was a bad thing. It was jolly
mm,
entertaining, and actually the idea was that they'd sort of speculated that King George, who was on the throne at that time, who was supposed to be the king that went mad, he'd married a lady who wasn't from England, but who was of sort of dusky, a bit difficult to know what her parentage was, but she was meant to be not English,
yeah.
and that was how they came about. And I think
Mm.
yeah. And then the other thing we saw this year, of course, is we saw with the new Rings of Power, which is a new Tolkien series that came out of Amazon, they deliberately went out of their way to try and cast as many um, uh, what was originally a very white medieval English sort of novel. They cast as many.
And I
Um,
think that there's one thing altering a historical fiction book to reflect modern contemporary fiction. But it's a different thing, isn't it, if you're trying to alter historical fact to reflect modern mores and society. That needs more thinking about, more careful analysis before we decide which way we should swing.
Yeah. Excellent. Okay, cool. Right. As a way of giving something back to the listener, I would like to look at some quick weekly top tips for anyone involved in writing or considering writing or writing their first novel, a memoir, whatever it is. So this week I wanted to look at author branding and why we as writers should be concerned or promoting our own brand. I think, Richard, you touched on it before about the need, even in the traditional market, for people to be out there as a writer,
Mm.
you know. Certainly, there's been a lot of news coverage recently about the top five publishers reducing their marketing departments. So they're not putting as much effort into marketing as they once did. Yeah, so I mean, I've got a few. I thought I might read them out, and then you can say, Mark, you're talking rubbish, or you can, I don't know, clap
talking
silently.
rubbish.
Anyway,
You are.
I'll go for number
You're
one.
talking. Let's hear it.
Yeah, number one, increased visibility and recognition. So what I'm looking at here is I very much believe that all authors, it is your own business. And I think we have to try and get people the idea that they are running a business. I mean, Sally, you've mentioned it as well when you were talking about self-publishing before. We need to have our own business as a writer, and I think that the one of those things that does is increase visibility. It increases recognition. It helps our readers to understand and quickly identify both us as writers, but also what it is that our work. If you know, I think one of the things I would say that my biggest mistake is I've written five full novels, and only three have been in the same genre. The other two have been in different genres. So I have, five novels in three different genres, and I would argue that maybe what I should have done is stick to one genre until you get known, until you get, as I say, this visibility, this recognition about who you are.
Yeah, I think we're thinking branding like in a more practical way. In that, I use three different platforms. I have an email marketing software, I have a piece of website software, and then I have like a design software. I create all my social media content. And actually, it is a devil of a job. You have to sit down and decide what font you're going to use, and then you have to determine that that font is available on all three pieces of software. And then you have to set it all up so that it all defaults to the font that you've chosen. And that sort of discipline of actually choosing a color scheme, choosing a font, and then sticking to it is at the basic of your branding.
Mm.
And so actually the font I've got my name in up there is actually one of the fonts which is used on the covers of my book.
Yeah.
And the logo behind me is one of the icon images that I try and use on the cover of all the books as well. But once you start thinking about it, it becomes easier, and you just have to be quite disciplined. And so that's what I see as the brand. But the other thing to think about when you're thinking about your brand is it's not really about genre. I mean, genre is genre, is the type of books you write. Brand, I think, is more about the look and feel. So actually, where your brand brings to the books is actually a color scheme or a look of the covers, possibly. And actually, what's interesting is if you had chosen one genre and you were on brand, then your covers would then reflect your website, your emails, and your social media. And that becomes, and it's quite interesting that in certain genre, I would say romance, and you only have to look on TikTok for about 10 minutes to find some romance authors, and there's a lot of sparkles and unicorns that go on. And whereas on science fiction, it's all about the rockets, and it's all about spaceships and the black gothic backgrounds, you know.
Yeah.
So
I
I
think,
think
yeah, you
being
could
on
argue the
brand,
same. What you can say the same thing with crime fiction, that covers are dark and somber and sort of have slightly menacing, a house in the woods sort of picture, or a figure looking away with their back to the viewer, sort of looking menacing or something like that. But yes, you're right. There is, but that's genre specific. But if you're going to run a website and you want a brand, and you're crime writing, you need to follow the trends of covers and things, as
yeah.
you said, you do for your science fiction.
Is if I had a start on my website, if I had like a sparkling tap dancing unicorn, that my readers would think I had gone slightly mad because that's not
I
the
think
kind of
they'd
science
take you out
fiction.
and shoot you, I think.
Yeah, just spear you with that unicorn.
Yes, be with it, exactly.
And I think, and so you have to sort of carry the brand through all of your assets, and your assets are your books, your digital platforms, and if you're traditionally published, you need to think about your letterhead and the way you present yourself to the agent, and so therefore, not only in your cover letter, if you're a thriller writer, I think they would expect a more dynamic and to the point cover letter than
Hmm.
someone who's trying to pitch either literary fiction or
Yeah,
romantic fiction. So
your
your
text
voice,
on your brand has got to
yes,
represent your genre to some extent. As you say, and a thriller
yes,
writer would write differently to a romantic fiction writer, or a science fiction writer would be using different words. So you've got to sort of reflect that. But
yeah,
this is the Luddite speaking here. I have a Twitter account, and I refuse to call it X because and that's it. I don't have a website, and I don't do Facebook, and I'm very
yeah,
frustrated with X because it started out when I joined 10 years ago. It seemed to be a community of authors who all exchange things and were talking about their book launches and whatever. And now it's got subsumed with either silly pictures or people ranting about whatever the latest politician has said about something else. And it's very hard to find that community of authors anymore.
Cool. Well, I think we're about to wrap it up. So I think that was I think what that demonstrates quite clearly is for anyone involved in writing, you need to think about branding. So there you go. That's the
Yeah.
top tip. The top
Yeah.
takeaway is think about your branding. I think
Thanks, Mark. Yeah.
I think there's a
and
whole
and
I
this,
think there's a whole uh, a session that can be done on branding, which we'll obviously have to cover for another day. So I think we'll leave it there for this week.
yep,
So, thanks for joining us, and remember to subscribe and do all those other things that everyone is supposed to tell you to do. And with that, I'll say goodbye from me.
goodbye from me.
And goodbye from me.
Richard,
Or is
you
it
missed
from
your cue.
him?
Let's try that again. Goodbye from me. Goodbye
Goodbye
from
from
Mark.
me and goodbye from him.
Can we try that one more time? Or shall we just
No,
leave the
please,
two?
no. We're just.
Uh,
I'm not editing this bit out. So no, we're not doing it again. That's
oh,
staying
well,
in.
goodbye from all of us then.
Goodbye from me.